Information-fueled,
opinion-driven. This is Nashville's Morning News with Dan Mandis.
And so, my fellow Americans,
we talk news.
6:07, Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Appreciate you being here. Finally, a Friday. Along with Johnny B, Ken Weaver, Dan Mandis here indeed. And want to welcome on into the program our grassroots political analyst, Matthew Hurtt, who was no doubt up and taking notes last night as Kamala Harris was giving her acceptance speech for the nomination for the Democrats. And always appreciate having you on, Matthew. Let's talk a little bit about this. I mean, for me, the biggest thing that came out of that speech, and I watched the entire thing, is that there were just incessant lies. I'm gonna play one soundbite, then I'm going to get to what you have to say about the speech overall. Johnny, need some audio?
To set free violent extremists who assaulted those law enforcement officers at the Capitol. His explicit intent to jail journalists, political opponents, and anyone he sees as the enemy. His explicit intent to deploy our active duty military against our own citizens.
All right, so that was, three lies right there in a row. Donald Trump has literally said he would look at the J6ers on a case-by-case basis. He never said that he would jail journalists. And by the way, he didn't in his first 4 years in office, although I'm sure there are times when he wanted to throw Jim Acosta someplace. And he wanted to use the National Guard to restore order during the George Floyd riots. So, Matthew, this was a speech, I don't know how long it was, maybe 30, 35 minutes. But I can't find a shred of truth in any of her statements.
Politicians often play fast and loose with the truth. But what we're seeing here is a post-truth campaign launch out of the gate from the convention. Everything this week was packaged by DNC comms professionals. It was spun in a manner that appeals to Democrats, that is Democrat talking points. And it is going to be very tricky for many voters to navigate what they are hearing from Democrat campaign operatives and candidates this cycle. This is kind of a fascinating place to be in, and it makes it even more important that your listeners pay attention to what politicians say and what they do to make sure that we're able to figure out the truth in between the spun tales of Kamala Harris, or Kamala, as Johnny B wants us to say, and whatever is happening out there in the campaign space.
Kamala Harris. I think we all agree that will be her name moving forward, especially after last night. I loved this. It was a political cliche for the ages where she actually said, "Trust me, I'll put country over politics." Listen to this.
Our nation with this election has a precious, fleeting opportunity to move past the bitterness, cynicism, and divisive battles of the past, a chance to chart a new way forward. Not as members of any one party or faction, but as Americans. And let me say, I know there are people of various political views watching tonight, and I want you to know, I promise to be a president for all Americans. You can always trust me to put country above party and self.
You can always trust me, Kamala Harris says. And you listen to that statement, and number one, it's obviously absurd when she says that she will put country over party. This is the woman that allowed, millions of illegal aliens to come into our country. It's hard to take her pleas of trust me seriously.
The consultants have sat down and they've said, what are the 4 or 5 or 6 messaging points that we're going to use to draw a contrast to Donald Trump? We saw some former Republicans last night and through the week speak in favor of Kamala Harris. And so that is one of the messaging points to peel people away from the Trump campaign. And this is how she's going to attempt to draw a contrast for the next several months. just one of the ways is to offer a contrast that is trust in Kamala Harris and fear in Donald Trump. And that is what we're going to see on the campaign trail.
I don't know. I have not looked a lot at the mainstream media this morning. I have not seen the fact checkers. I know that PolitiFact came out and they did some fact checking on Kamala Harris, which I'll get to here in a little bit, regarding Donald Trump and tax cuts. So one of the things that I find fascinating is the mainstream media, are they fact checking this morning? I mean, I've got CNN on in here, and I don't see them doing a lot of fact checking, even though the things that she has said are actual provable lies backed up by data. I mean, that the fact checking would be backed up by data. Do you think that the media at some point will start fact checking?
Dan, I Googled fact check Kamala Harris this morning, and one of the top hits is the New York Times fact checking Harris's speech. Now, it's behind a paywall, but I can tell you it says everything was true. I don't know when the media is going to start fact checking Kamala Harris. She has to sit down for interviews with tough questions with good reporters, and we're just not seeing that yet. I think that one of the things that they're going to try to do is circumvent the traditional press, not allowing Kamala Harris to interact with them and to continue to beat the drum on the messaging points that we saw this week at the convention.
Did you see anything last night that would compel an independent to vote for Kamala Harris? And I want to talk about what exactly is an independent, by the way, but because I think there's two different kinds of independents. There's all different kinds of independents, but I think there's some independents who are really, really smart. And then there's people who are called independents because they don't know the difference between a Democrat and a Republican. So anything that you hear last night that would appeal to, let's talk first about an independent who is really smart and is up on things.
So you're absolutely right, Dan. There are kind of two kinds of independents, and the ones who do pay attention, I'm not sure. I think the overall tone of the speech probably would appeal to those people out in the suburbs who don't like mean tweets, that kind of sort of unifying attempt to unify the message. But I just didn't see anything policy-wise that was true that would actually appeal to folks who are trying to make ends meet, trying to make the mortgage, trying to save for retirement, and trying to ensure the best education for their children. I just didn't see that last night.
It's so weird. Like I'm looking at CNN now. Breaking overnight. Harris vows to chart a new way forward for America. Just completely, are they going to try to erase the last 3.5 years?
That is exactly what they're trying to do. She's been the vice president for 3.5 years. She has been at the table for all of these policy decisions, and she owns, in part, all of the policy decisions and policy failures of this administration. And the media is not going to hold her accountable for that, and it will be up to the voters to do that for them.
All right, a couple of other things real quick. You've got RFK Jr. All signs show that he is going to throw his support behind Donald Trump. I don't know if there's going to be, I don't know if you call it, they're trying to call this a sort of like a unity party. I don't know if that's what I would call it. I guess it depends on how Trump frames it. But how big of a deal is this going to be for Donald Trump? Because this is a really close race, and RFK could theoretically throw some support behind Donald Trump, specifically in some of these battleground states.
Yeah, this could be interesting in pockets of 10 or 20,000 votes in swing states. People who are kind of tired of both parties, but they thought RFK was curious or interesting. That endorsement may nudge them in the direction of wherever RFK goes in this. But it's a lot of times these kinds of curiosities on the campaign trail, especially at the national level, the presidential level, a third-party campaign has a limited shelf life. And early in RFK's campaign, a lot of folks on the right were very curious about him, and then Donald Trump started attacking him when he was, when RFK was peeling off some of those votes. I just don't know how far he makes it into the general election with an endorsement or the infrastructure of his former campaign.
Let me ask you, this was actually encouraging last night. Donald Trump making nice with Governor Brian Kemp out of Georgia. You and I have spoken about this before, where Trump was attacking Kemp, again, the governor of a really important state. This is what Brian Kemp said last night.
Cannot afford another 4 years of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And I think, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz would be even worse. So we need to send Donald Trump back to the White House. We need to retake the Senate. We need to hold the House. We need to hold our legislative majorities that we have in the great state of Georgia.
And this is how Trump responded.
Well, I just saw Brian on a very good man. Did you ever hear of a man named Sean Hannity? And he was interviewed by Sean Hannity, and he was very nice, and he said he wants Trump to win, and he's going to work with me 100%, and I think we're going to have a very good relationship with Brian Kemp, and that was on just before you people went on with that speech that we just listened to.
So that was Donald Trump, graciously accepting the endorsement of Brian Kemp. Does this show, I'm feeling, and you may have a different feeling, I'm feeling that Trump has been particularly on point for the last week or so.
Yeah, I heard, I heard you talk about this in the last segment, and I tend to agree. There have been a number of unforced errors that have been minor, but could snowball into something bigger later in the cycle. Brian Kemp won Georgia by 7 points. There was no reason ever for anybody in the Trump campaign to slight or attack Brian Kemp. He's a popular governor in a state where Donald Trump, the margin was less than a point. And so this is nice to see. It is really, I'm enthusiastic and excited about this. You and I have talked about this a number of times. And I hope that moving forward, Donald Trump can have weeks like he has had this week out on the campaign trail, taking the message to the voters and making a compelling argument against the Kamalanism, whatever we're calling it today, the failed economic policies of the last 3.5 years that would only get worse under a president and vice president who are even more committed to left-wing philosophy in the national government than Joe Biden. This is kind of a terrifying place that we're in with what Kamala Harris and Tim Walz believe.
Well, it is August 23rd, and Harris said that she would give an interview by the end of the month, and so we're about a week away. Have you heard of any interviews that she's going to be giving? I know that these things sometimes just magically appear out of nowhere. Hey, she's going to be on ABC tomorrow night.
You know, it takes a lot of time to coordinate and interact with, especially a presidential campaign, to get something like that scheduled. I haven't heard a thing, and I just don't know. So the best we can do is have reporters keep putting pressure on her until the end of the month and see what happens.
Do you think that she could actually get away with not doing any interviews? And I have a feeling she's going to try to somehow get out of the debate because she's going to say, oh, Donald Trump is this, that, and the other, and we're not going to participate in this because he's a threat to democracy. I could see her trying to do that. Do you think she could actually get away with no interviews and no debates?
That's a very interesting point, Dan, to call Trump's campaign illegitimate. He's a threat to democracy, so I'm not even going to recognize him. That is something that I think would shock voters, but it is definitely the messaging angle that they are moving toward. I don't know. I hate making predictions because I hate being wrong. And every election cycle since 2016 has gotten weirder, and we're in for a ride. I just hope voters, see the truth, make good decisions, and get their friends and their neighbors out to vote.
All right, Matthew, and I know that you are doing just that along with many others. How can people find you on Twitter?
I'm on Twitter at Matthew Hurtt, MatthewHurtt.